Hello, I want us to have some discussion on the scope of the study. Every study has boundaries within which it is carried out, and also within which the conclusions made by researchers are interpreted. That is why every study is required to have a scope. Our discussion today will focus on three principal areas. We want first to understand the meaning of scope of the study. We will then look into the elements or some of the issues that constitute a scope of the study. And then lastly, we will look at the importance of the scope of the study. That is, why is it important for researchers to have a scope of the study? Let's begin by having an understanding of what is meant by the scope of the study. A scope of the study basically refers to the elements that will be covered in a research, and they include the purpose of the study, the population of the study, as well as the characteristics of that population, the geographical location where the study will be undertaken, the time period within which the study will be done, and the theories that the study will be anchored on. The main purpose of the scope of the study is to explain the extent to which the research area will be explored and the specific parameters that the researchers will observe while undertaking the study. This implies that researchers must define the scope of the study, the sample size of the study, the geographical coverage of the study, the time frame within which the study will be executed, and the theories that the study will focus on as part of the scope of the study. The scope of the study therefore explains the extent to which the research area will be explored in the work and specify the parameters within which the study will be operating. In other words, how wide geographically as well as thematically is the study going to cover. That is basically what is understood as scope of the study. Let us now examine some of the elements of the scope of the study. One of them is called the geographical element or the geographical scope. And this refers to the location of the study, that is where the study will be done. It might be a political confederation or merely a region. In Kenya, for instance, the geographical scope of a study may be a country. It may be a part of a country such as a province, a district, a division. It might also be a political constituency or simply an electoral ward. The geographical scope of the study may also be spread in different locations in a country, such as an informal settlements in different urban areas. For example, in Kenya, we can decide to carry out a study in informal areas, in settlements. That is what we call slums. And we could pick a slum in a city such as Nairobi, in Mombasa, in Kisumu, in Eldoret, in Nakuru, and many others. All of them put together will constitute the scope of the study. And the scope, rather geographical scope of the study. A geographical scope of the study might also just be institutions, say, of higher learning, which might be found in different countries. Someone could consider his or her scope of the study as institutions, maybe universities, and come up with a set of several universities, and that will constitute the scope of that particular study. So scope can come in many forms, depending on the issue the researcher intends to investigate, and also the choice of the researcher. So scope can be several institutions put together, which might be found in different geographical units. It could be a political constituency or a political division. It could be an electoral ward. It could be an administrative area, among others. That is what is meant by the geographical scope of the study. Another issue that constitutes the scope of the study is the thematic scope. And by the thematic scope, we mean the specific issues that the study intends to investigate and provide answers to. Thematic scope is largely defined by the general and specific objectives of the study. It's expected that once the researcher has identified the research problem and objective of the study, the researcher uses now this to guide in the search for answers that will now be used to answer the research problem. The researcher also identifies the variables that will be measured or analyzed to determine the relationship between them. The thematic scope of the study, therefore, includes the research problem, the study objectives, and key variables in the specific objectives. Take the case, for instance, a researcher who intends to understand maybe factors that is contributing to school dropout in a given geographical area. These factors, in terms of specific objectives, a researcher might want to look at maybe the economic factors, the social factors such as issues of early pregnancies, among others. All these will constitute the specific objectives that the study intends to look into. If, say, the study has 3 specific objectives, the expectation is that the thematic scope of that study will be along the 3 specific objectives. What again is required of the researchers is now to identify the specific variables, that is the independent and dependent variables, and then come up with the descriptive variables, the specific issues under each dependent variable that will be the focus of that particular study. All that put together, therefore, the researcher is therefore in a position to now constitute what we now call the thematic scope of the study. In other words, thematic scope simply relates to the specific issues that a researcher intends to investigate, and by investigating them, the researcher hopes to find answers to the research problem that had been conceptualized, as well as answers to the objectives that the researcher had set out to achieve in the study. Another important element of the scope of the study is population. Population in research is understood as the individuals or objects that the research will focus on. All individuals or objects within a certain population usually have a common binding characteristics or traits, and researchers are required to identify the population or group of people whose views or opinion will be sought to provide answers to the objectives of the study. It is important for researchers to have a clear definition of the study population, because such understanding will enable them to narrow down the scope of their research and also to ensure that findings of the study are applicable to the intended population. A population of the study can be government officials, college students, women entrepreneurs, employees of a given organization or sector. It can be pastoral communities. It can even be traders. So when we talk of population, we simply mean the specific groups whose studies, rather whose views or opinion on a given issue would be sought for purposes of enabling the researcher to understand the research problem. And we have said a population here can be people who work in government or government officials. It can be students at any level, high school, primary school, or college. It can be women in business, among others. So it's expected of researchers to first identify the population of the study that they will have, and then further to provide specific characteristics of that study. A good study or a good research problem with regard to scope must be quite clear in terms of the population that it is going to focus on. That is why we say that we cannot have a scope of the study without the population. Every study must specify the people, either in terms of actual people, or they could be objects whose views the study will rely on to enable for the generation of data and evidence that supports the findings of the study. Then are the importance of having a scope of the study. Why must researchers be concerned about the scope of the study? One is that the scope of the study helps researchers to define the boundaries of the study. That is, it sets boundaries that limit the scope of investigation to a specified group of individuals, a phenomena, a geography, or a set of conceptual issues or dimensions. The boundary of the study is set at the proposal development stage, where the researcher sets out thematic areas, population, and research methodologies. And this enables researchers to gather relevant data and avoid unnecessary information that might complicate the results of the study. It should be noted that the themes that a researcher sets limits the researcher in terms of investigating just those thematic issues. Again, the population that the researcher has set out to seek their views with a view to answering the research questions, again, it obligates the researcher to simply limit him or herself to that particular population. If a study is to be carried out in a given geographical location, a province, a district, a location, or a ward, again, the researcher is required to limit his inquiries within that particular geographical area. That is why we are saying that having a scope of the study is important, because it defines the boundaries within which the research will be carried out, so that the researcher does not go beyond the themes that are set out in the study objectives, beyond the geographical area that is set out in the research problem, and also beyond the population that the study has also set out, both in the study objectives as well as the research problem. So scope of the study is quite important, because it enables the researcher to narrow down their inquiries into a specific thematic issues, a specific population, and also a specific geographical area. The scope of the study is also important for purposes of planning. Planning is important in research because it enables researchers to know exactly what is required. And for instance, if a study is to be undertaken in a given geographical area, the distance between where the researcher is based and where the study will be done might determine how much resources a researcher requires to undertake. Again, the population that the study seeks to seek their views in the study, again, depending on the number and also the ease or difficulty with which to get them, might also present the researcher with understanding of what the researcher needs in terms of budget to cover the distances involved and also to reach the population. So, scope of the study helps the researchers in terms of planning, in terms of the kind of resources the researcher needs, and also in terms of the kind of methodologies to employ to reach particular individuals that are necessary for purposes of the study. It should be called that when a research is being conducted, there are several activities involved. There is the actual proposal development, there is the field work, that is data collection, there's the report writing, among others. Each of these activities, the amount of time and resources spent on them might differ based on the amount, rather based on the kind, on the scope, rather on the scope of the study. So that scope is an important element when it comes to mobilization of resources, availability of time, as well as mobilization of individuals whose contribution can be considered as being important in the success of the research activity. Uh, the scope of the study is also helpful when it comes to interpretation of the results of the study. And by interpretation of data, we mean the process of using diverse analytical methods to review data and arrive at relevant conclusions. Interpretation of data helps the researchers to categorize, manipulate, and summarize the information in order to answer critical questions. Interpretation is a crucial step in the research process because it helps researchers to determine the relevance of their results, relate them to existing knowledge, and shape subsequent research goals. Clarifying the scope of the study is therefore helpful for interpreting the results because the results are influenced by the scope of the study as well as the kind of data that has been gathered. For instance, if one has a study like the causes of drugs and alcohol addiction conducted in informal settlements, this one can give results that need to be interpreted within that context of informal settlements. This is because the causes of drugs in an informal or what contributes or the drivers of drug addiction in an informal settlement might not be the same as the drivers of drug addiction within the affluent community. While, for instance, stress and unemployment could lead to drug abuse in informal settlements, perhaps in affluent societies or communities, the presence of money among the youth without a clear way of using it can also drive such youths into drug abuse. So availability of money in one setting can lead to drug abuse, but lack of the same in another setting can also lead to drug abuse. That's why we say that the extent to which data is interpreted and applied relies on where the study was done, that is the geographical area where the study was done, the thematic issues, and the population that was studied. That's why the three aspects, the three elements of the scope of the study become quite useful when the results of such a study is being carried out. The scope of the study, therefore, provides a context within which the study results can be interpreted and then applied. The scope of the study is also important when it comes to replication of research findings. In research, replication refers to the repetition of a study's procedure and observing if the prior findings repeat in similar conditions. A study is replicated when the results of original study are as closely related to the newly collected data. Scope and limitations also help to make the study more replicable by specifying what was executed in the previous study. For instance, a study on the causes of drugs and substance addiction may yield different results based on the population, characteristics, and location of the study. And replication is important because it adds information about the reliability of the conclusions or estimates to be made about the data. Once the scope of the study is clearly defined, the procedures properly outlined, the population to be studied clearly specified, the geographical area again specified, it is easier for future researchers to adopt the same procedures and then use them to carry them out in a different geographical area just to gauge and see whether there is similarities or differences with regard to research findings. Or the same study can be done in the same area, but after a given period of time, still focusing on a population characteristic that is similar to the one that was previously covered. The purpose is to see whether the results of the study repeat themselves. But replication is only possible if a study has clearly defined what the population was, the geographical area was, the main variables were. If that clarity is not clear, then it becomes difficult for future researchers to conceptualize the context to which they carry out other studies for purposes of establishing whether there is an element of similarity or differences with regard to the study being carried out in relationship to the one that was carried out previously. So replication is important, and one of the ways through which replication can be achieved in a study is by looking at the scope of the previous studies so that current studies that seek to see whether the results can be replicated are based on the thematic, population, and geographical structures of the previous studies. The last issue that we want to look at with regard to the scope of the study or with regard to this presentation is how we can apply what we have studied in a real situation where we are required now to write it down in terms of a proposal or a thesis. And that's why we now want to have something small here for purpose of demonstration, just to put what we have discussed into the right context. We said that there are certain elements that must be in a given, that must constitute scope of the study. One of them is purpose of the study. The other one is where the study is done. The third one is the location of the study. The other one is the population of the study. We also have the issues to be studied, or what we call the thematic areas, and then the theories that are meant to be applied in the study. So as a demonstration, we can have this. that this study will focus on personal characteristics considered by college-educated females in the choice of marital partners in Western Kenya. That becomes the purpose of the study. Then the other element that we must include in the study is the study location. So the study will be carried out in Western Kenya, which comprises of Kisumu, Siaya, Kisii, Migori, Kakamega, and Bungoma counties. There, we are now describing the geographical location of the study. Remember, we said that the geographical location is also an element of the scope of the study. Then now, we want to look at the population of the study and also give it a candid description in our scope of the study, so that we can say that the study will use a sample of 250 females with the college level of education and above, and will be selected through stratified random sampling. We have mentioned the population, the number that we intend to use, and how we are going to arrive at that number. Then with regard to the thematic areas, we can say that personal characteristics will be examined in the context of educational, income, and marital statuses. In other words, we are saying that personal characteristics as a variable can be so many things. So we have to specify which specific issues our study will focus on within that personal characteristics, because personal characteristics of an individual can have as many as 20 or 30 traits, but it's not possible for a study to cover all personal characteristics that constitute an individual. So here we are limiting ourselves to 3 areas, that is education, income, and marital statuses. That is now our thematic areas. We now want to say that how then do we indicate the theories that apply in the study? We can say that this study will be conducted from January 2020 to August 2023 and will be guided by the rational choice and social exchange theories. In that case, we have provided the time frame of our study as well as the theories that this will be used to explain or to inform the study. So that is a sample description or a sample depiction of how a scope of the study is written. Indeed, students are required to put it in prose form, not in point form as indicated here. Here we have indicated in point form just for purposes of illustration, but in actual writing, it should be done in a prose form. That is our discussion today about the scope of the study.